right now. Wonderful. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm Maria Bernier, the State Data Coordinator from the Connecticut State Library. My pronouns are she and her. We're here today to talk about the fiscal year 22 state annual report, and there have been some changes. So everything I tell you is online on our LibGuide, and I'm going to show you where that is when we're done. But in the meantime, I'm going to make you listen to me talk about it because you may have questions that you're thinking of as you go along. So as I said, please drop those into the chat, or when we get to the end, you can turn your mic on and just ask them aloud. That would be great. But we're going to talk about the new deadline, some new questions, some questions that have been deleted, and some COVID questions that are still sticking around for the third year. So that's what we're headed for today. I don't think we're going to spend the full hour here today. Hopefully we can get you out a little bit early. Now, I always like to start these webinars with a reminder about the difference between the state annual report, which we're talking about today, and your own reports and your own data that you're collecting for your library. Because as many times as I say it, the message still isn't getting out to everybody. So I'm just going to keep saying it. So remember, the state report, the primary purpose of this document is to collect data that we're sending to IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, for the Nationwide Public Libraries Survey. And this is a survey of basically every public library in every state and territory across the country. And we're sharing a set of questions so that we are consistent in what we're measuring from state to state and town to town, library to library, so that we're getting something that's reasonably comparable across the country. And because those questions are consistent and static, it can take a long time to change them. There's like a 2-page procedure written out for how that happens, right? This step and that step. But basically it goes through kind of a proposal process for either a change or a new question. There's a lot of analysis of it. There's some testing of potential questions or testing of wording, and it eventually goes to every single state. And so the state librarian and the data coordinator have to vote. And once a change proposal is approved by at least 2/3 of the states, it becomes official. And then we start rolling it out. So it can take a good 2 to 3 or more years to change questions. And when it's a particularly troublesome or meaty topic, it can take longer to kind of tease out what exactly we're looking for and what exactly we're trying to measure nationwide. And so those changes take a while. So that's why we end up with many of those same static questions from year to year that can't be changed. I can't change them. Deborah can't change them. There's no individual person in any state who is authorized to change those nationwide questions. So just be aware of that. If you're going through the report and you see a question and it's a US question, it's a national question, I cannot mess with that. All right. So just be aware of that. You can complain to me and I'll say, gee, I'm really sorry you feel that way. I can't help you with that, right? Now, on the other hand, we are allowed to add our own questions for state purposes, and we do that in Connecticut. We absolutely do. So a lot of the questions about financials and salaries and specific staffing levels, those are local questions. And you can actually see in the annual report now which ones are Connecticut questions and which ones are national questions. And I'll show you how to tell that. So we have our questions. Some of those may be similar to what the libraries in Massachusetts and Vermont are answering. They may be completely different. We have a lot of latitude to add questions. We also have latitude to take away those questions, and that's something we did this year as well. So this is the state annual report, and it is different from your own reports, right? You guys can collect any information you want, like whatever numbers you want to collect for your own reports. And I encourage you to do that. because you can tell a much richer and deeper story with all of that extra data than I am able to collect in the annual report. You can really drill down in your reference questions in a really granular way to figure out how much of the business community you're helping, what kind of questions you're getting, how much is local history, right? So you could really have fun with your reference questions in a way that we're not representing in the annual report. Likewise, you could have fun with circulation. I heard from a library that measures initial checkouts and also counts automated renewals, and that adds up to total circulation. But they were actually interested in the initial checkout number for the first checkout. So that's something they're measuring. You guys figure out what you want to measure for your library, because you're using that data to talk to your community, your stakeholders, your staff, the capital F friends, the board, everybody. That helps to tell your story as a library. And it's under your control, right? You pick, you get to decide, and you tell your story. So these are really two different reports, right? Mine is really pretty static, pretty fixed, designed for a specific purpose. I'm collecting data across Connecticut so that, again, we can try to compare something that is more apples to apples. But you have latitude within your own library to tell whatever story you want, and I encourage you to do that. Okay, so this slide shows you how in the annual report, you can tell where those questions come from. So it's the very first column on the left when you open the annual report form, the very first column. If you see a US, that's a national question that we get from IMLS. That's one I cannot change, right? So when we talk about age ranges for children's programs, those come from IMLS. I sympathize that your library counts them differently. Sorry about that, but you're going to have to do your best with those because we are using the age ranges from IMLS. Now, if you see an abbreviation for CT, obviously that's a Connecticut specific question. And then that funny little F is sort of a feeder question where it might feed into one of the national questions. And there are a lot of places where I have to collect more detailed numbers in order to reach a bigger number. And sometimes those add up a little bit differently. But the feeder questions also help me give you guys the really interesting chart maker tools that Tom put together. So all of those numbers feed into a bigger story. And so I actually need all of those little questions that start with an F in order to get to the questions that start with a US and in order to get you all of the reports that you really appreciate. So that's why you'll see all those different questions in there, but you can also tell where those questions come from, which ones I have latitude over and which ones I don't. So hopefully, and maybe you can spread the word with your coworkers about how that works and where these questions come from now that you know, and you are empowered to inform everybody about which ones are Connecticut and which ones are US. Alrighty, so this is the big red important news I need to tell you this year. We have a new deadline of November 1st. This will still give you 3.5 months in order to complete your report form. But it also gives me an extra couple of weeks time after the reports come in to review them all, check the data for accuracy, follow up with you guys with questions, because those questions happen a lot, and make sure that we are getting accurate information. Then I smush all of that into the statistical profile, which is just that big data sheet, right? But then I also take all of that information and turn it into the chart and report creators, all those great advocacy flyers. So there's a lot of kind of data manipulation and data reuse that has to happen after the reports come in so that I can give you what you need to talk to your finance departments and your councils and all of your funders in budget season. And I often hear from libraries in early to mid-December who are already starting to look for those comparison numbers. So I am trying really hard to get the data from you guys and smush it all around and get it back to you in a timely fashion. So that's why our deadline has changed. But I also want to tell you that the libraries in Massachusetts have 1 month to complete their forms, and you guys have 3.5 months. So rock on, you got all kinds of time. Now, also, let's talk about our new Connecticut questions. There are 2 of them this year. These are really quick, hopefully, yes, no questions. And the first one is whether your library has an equity, diversity, and inclusion plan. This is how it's worded in the form, but maybe you have a diversity, equity, access, and inclusion plan. So you're still going to say yes, right? This question really includes all of those concepts, social justice, all of those great trends that we're moving toward in our library. So we're just wanting to know if your library's got a plan, yes or no. Then we are also asking if your library is compliant with the Children's Internet Protection Act. So whether you call it SIPA or SIPA, are you doing those factors in order to be compliant with the act? This question replaces those 2 questions about the number of computers you were filtering in the children's room and in the teen and adult computers. So we moved in this direction instead, because a lot of libraries in Connecticut are kind of going towards SIPA compliance for E-rate purposes or other purposes, but it does open you up to accepting federal funding for technology. And here on the slide, you can see what it means in order to be SIPA compliant. You've got to have an internet safety policy, which is a fairly easy document to write. We've got a lot of examples online, and you can steal from your colleagues, which is what we do. You also need to filter all of your computers, public and staff computers. And if you're a CEN customer, they can help you with that for free. So it's a great opportunity. And then third, you're just going to have a hearing or a meeting about your internet safety policy, and you're going to advertise it in a public notice. So once I show you where these slides are on our website, you'll be able to click on the link on this slide to get over to the information from ALA about the Children's Internet Protection Act. They've got a ton of info up there. So those are our 2 new Connecticut questions, pretty short and easy. Let's talk about our new IMLS questions. So this year, we're finally breaking out into all of the age groups, okay? So we're separating out the children's programs, where last year we were reporting them as a group 0 to 11 ages. Now we're sort of differentiating children 0 to 5, which is really going to be more of an early literacy program versus children ages 6 to 11. So think about that as you're putting your programs together. And what is your target age group? And I know that you're going to be doing programs that span both of those and maybe get into teen and YA ages as well. Do your best, okay? Just pick whichever you think target age group will be most responsive to this program that you're offering, and go ahead and count the program for that age. And remember, with your attendance, you're counting everybody who shows up, adults included, right? So when you're doing storytime programs for children ages 0 to 5, you're counting a program, and you're counting all of the kids and adults who show up as attendance, right? So all of those heads and all of those butts, you're going to count as your attendance at that program, as we've been doing for many years. Also, IMLS has a new question that we all voted on this year, trying to dig into fine-free libraries a little bit more. And it turns out that that term fine-free has a lot of extra details in it, right? Because some libraries charge adults, but don't charge kids and teens, or they might charge for DVDs and museum passes, but not for print materials. So to say fine-free often takes a lot of definition in terms of what does that actually mean. So what IMLS compromised on was to say, does your library charge fines, overdue fines, for any users, so that means any age, when they fail to bring back their physical print materials by the due date? So basically, did they keep their book or their magazine for longer than they should have? And do you charge them fines? That should be a quick yes or no answer. And this in Connecticut helps us to supplement our existing questions about your typical fine for an overdue book or an overdue DVD. So together, these will help us tell a better story in Connecticut. Not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm just going to keep talking. You guys can cogitate. You're probably taking this all in right now and thinking about it. Now, there are a couple of questions that I'd like you to start counting as of July 1st to report next year. And you think I'm a little crazy, right? Because I'm saying you need to think about this now, and it's going to show up a whole year from now in the annual report. But there are things that I'd like to capture now, and we'll work our way into getting that data over the next couple of years. So the first one is these views of pre-recorded programs. And we've been counting these, right? Like if you're using the program spreadsheet, you are counting these and tracking these, and you are an expert and you know totally how to do this. Except that IMLS just changed the time frame for which we're counting. So we used to count 7 days, right? You'd post it. 7 days later, you'd take a look and see how many people watched it over those 7 days. You'd say, great, that's what I'm putting in my spreadsheet. And you had it locked in. But now IMLS says we want you to count for 30 days. So basically a month. And this gives you a longer tail on those, right? Because you may have people who are coming to it in the second week or the third week and really catching on to it at that point. So you get to count all of those people now, right? So you post it and 30 days later, you go back and check the views and see how many times somebody has actually played or watched that video online. And we do still have a Google Sheet with instructions for how you can get those numbers on different platforms. Most typically libraries are using, I think, YouTube, Facebook, a couple other places. There might be a Vimeo or something like that, but you can usually find these numbers for the number of times it's been watched. So that'll be a change. As of July 1st, make a switch in your brain. You'll be counting that instead. Also, starting July 1st and going forward, we've got a new question in Connecticut about counting these one-on-one technology consultations. And here we're really trying to get deeper into digital navigation, digital literacy skills, information technology. So these are the really deep reference questions, right? Where you might have book a librarian for 30 minutes to do one-on-one help with your smartphone, or one-on-one help with an email account or with bill pay, that kind of thing. So it's really that interaction between a library staff member. So it doesn't have to be a reference librarian, could be any of your staff members, doesn't have to be scheduled, could be completely impromptu where somebody comes in and says, oh my gosh, I just got this new thing. My kids gave it to me. I have no idea how to use it. What do I do? Those count too, which is fabulous. And you're counting that you spent a considerable amount of time tutoring or teaching them about information technology or digital literacy skills. So that considerable amount of time is a factor here. So not that they come in and say, how do I turn this on? And you turn it on for them. That's not really a one-on-one tech consultation to fit this definition. You're looking for something a little bit more in depth where you're really working with them on solving an issue for them. And there are some examples here about tutorials on a new e-reader or a smartphone. Again, maybe you're helping somebody create an email account or a social media account. You might be showing somebody how to use a video app so that they can call their family members. You might be helping them with online job applications, or how to get through a website, how to make an appointment at the DMV, how to make a healthcare appointment. So many of those things we can start counting now as one-on-one tech consultations. And you will still continue to include those questions as part of your reference transactions. So figure out how that's going to work in your library in terms of how you are keeping track of those, right? Whether you actually physically do a hash mark on a sheet every day, or whether you're using some kind of spreadsheet or some kind of software to help you keep track of these things. But start telling your staff about this, tell everybody, because this happens not just at the reference desk, it's happening, I'm sure, at the CERC desk, at the tech desk. Just get everybody on board with these consultations. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the questions here. From Lorna, is one-on-one time under reference programs or something entirely new? So this is a reference transaction. You'll see right down here, these are reference transactions. These are not programs, because if you look at the definition of programs, that's something completely different. That's a group interaction that's planned. So if it's a group interaction, it is most likely a program. One-on-one tech consultations are definitely not a program. So you'll want to take care that you're counting those in the right place. Kristen, your question, reference questions are only the unscheduled ones. I'm not sure that that is explicit in the definition. It does say that it includes unscheduled reference transactions, but it doesn't specifically exclude scheduled reference questions, which is a little tricksy. And that's a question that I think IMLS still needs to resolve. Basically, I'm telling you guys, a reference question, whether it's scheduled or unscheduled, if you feel it meets your criteria and the definition for a reference transaction, you go ahead and count that. Okay, Sarah, so the one-on-ones will be essentially double counted reference transaction and one-on-one. Yes and no. You're putting them into the one-on-one tech consultations and you're putting them into the reference transactions, but I'm never going to add those two numbers together. So the one-on-one tech consultations is basically a subset of reference transactions. So what I could do is be really granular and say, send me your entire number for reference transactions, then break out the number for tech consultations, then break out the number for business local history transactions, then break out the number for this. But we're not going that route, right? The tech consultations is just a subset of your reference transactions, and I'm not going to put them in any kind of report where they're added together. So Kara, in the children's department, teaching them to use BookFlix. I'm sorry that I don't know what BookFlix is. Is that if it's an app or something, or if it's something similar to Libby or Overdrive, if you are teaching them maybe how to download a book or how to read a book or how to use the software to read a book, that sounds like a tech consultation. Yes, that's a good example. Lorna and Catherine, counting separately from reference, will it be its own line? Yeah, this is a completely different question, right? So on the report, it's going to have its own line. I forget where it is. I think it's in section 2. It's a separate line. It's a separate question. You're counting it separately in the report from your reference transactions. So it's a whole different question. Carol, should we be keeping track of local history questions? I feel like you should absolutely be keeping track of local history questions, and those are absolutely excellent reference questions. Rock on with that. Yes, go for that. So let's talk about some deleted questions. I did a survey, you may remember, earlier this spring, just asking librarians about some specific questions and whether or not you find them useful in the report. And that was to kind of gauge whether I could get away with deleting them from the annual report and removing some questions, since we are continuing to add questions. I'm trying to, along the way, try to reduce the reporting burden a little bit. So we went ahead and deleted the dates of curbside service and whether it's for residents and non-residents. At this point, if you're offering curbside service, you're offering it, right? And if you're not, you're not, but it may come or go. I don't need to know the dates when it's being offered. As I mentioned, we also pulled out these two questions about how many computers are using filtering software, because we put in that Children's and Internet Protection Act compliance question instead. And then I pulled out the two questions about ILLs you get from out-of-state libraries or provide to out-of-state libraries, because nobody really needed that information. We didn't report it to IMLS. We didn't use it in any of kind of our reports back to you guys. It was just a number that we were collecting for no purpose. So that went out the door. So there's 6 fewer questions, at least, you have to answer. And unfortunately, some of the COVID questions are still here for the 3rd year. Most of them are yes or no. You probably remember that from last year. There are 2 questions that still require counting, and maybe this isn't even a factor at your library this fiscal year, right? So we're still asking about the number of weeks in this fiscal year that your library was physically closed due to COVID. Maybe you had a breakout across the staff and you were closed for a week to let everybody recover. So that would be number of weeks closed would be 1. Probably this isn't impacting a lot of libraries this year. Then again, we're asking about whether your library had limited occupancy during the fiscal year. And when you get into the report, you'll see that there's a lot more information about what limited occupancy means. That can include, obviously, the limit on the number of people in your building, but it could also mean that you've transitioned to appointment only use or time limits on your visitors, or maybe you've closed some stacks or some meeting rooms. All of that would qualify as limited occupancy. This may still be a factor in some libraries, so just think about the number of weeks that you were going through those circumstances. Those are still here. In Connecticut, we're going to continue to ask about curbside service in the sense of, if you offered it, tell us either how many transactions you had or the number of patrons who used the service, because this is starting to measure that usage of that service and potentially how you're meeting a need. So this is really a new thing that has stuck around since COVID. People love curbside service. They love that kind of concierge service. So this will remain, I think, at several libraries. So if you get a chance to count that, great, send it to me, and then I can send it back to you on the advocacy flyers. If you don't count it, don't worry about it, right? Don't stress about that. We're not sending it to IMLS. It's really for you guys. All right, because I got rid of some questions and we're adding some questions, I rearranged a few sections. So the COVID questions are in section 6 where they have been, but I'm going to start transitioning section 6 over to the concepts of social justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. So we're going to hang on to some questions in from COVID, I think, going forward. And we're going to kind of try to make this section really more about these themes. So when I mentioned earlier that question about whether your library has an EDI plan, that's in section 6 now. Likewise, the questions that we added last year about whether you lend computers and hotspots for people to take home, that's in section 6. And all of the fines questions are combined into section 6. And I think I want to hang on to these COVID-19 questions about the online card registrations, because that's a really fascinating way to reach new patrons and to make them able to use your services and your online books. I also want to keep measuring curbside service because I think that's a great, again, accessibility measure for people in your community. And of course, outdoor Wi-Fi access. That's been a huge thing in libraries. Want to keep tracking the libraries that are offering that to their patrons. So we're kind of grouping those questions together in the future. Okay, if you came to this session last year, you don't have to stick around anymore unless you want to. I like to talk about clarifications and reminders because some of these, some of this information still has not really trickled out to the broader library community. So I'm going to keep talking about it, right? And again, the program questions and the age ranges come to me from IMLS. I cannot change those. Please do your best to match those age ranges as you can on the basis of what you're offering to your patrons. But we have this fabulous tool for how you can count your programs. And it's a great Excel sheet. I may make a few tweaks and upload version 4 of that soon, just because it'll have the new guidance about counting views for 30 days instead of 7 days. So that'll probably be an update. You can still keep using the old one, right? Because you get to put in the numbers for views. So you can update that however you want. But there's a lot of information online about how to use that spreadsheet. There's a video that goes on with me kind of guiding you through the sheet. There are some slides about the webinar, and there are multiple hour-long webinars actually about it on our YouTube channel. So you can check those out. All right, program formats. Oh, I'm sorry, Jan, I just saw your question. When will the survey be available for you to get started? It usually comes out in mid-July, and that is still my target. So usually July 15th or so, that kind of mid-July timeframe, waiting until the fiscal year has actually ended before we launch it out. So that gives you from mid-July until November 1st to complete it. Okay, so back to programs. Just a reminder, in the spreadsheet, it does ask you, it kind of forces you to pick one that you're going to pick, whether it's an in-person on-site program or an in-person off-site program, which is a nice, fun, different option that libraries are doing, or a live virtual program. So this is something that may be streamed over YouTube or Facebook, or you might have a pre-recorded program where you recorded your story time and posted it later for people to watch, or you had some other recording that you put up online. So those are your program formats. You're going to count them only once, and the spreadsheet will kind of force you into that choice, right? And you'll always default to an in-person choice. So there could be opportunities where you have a hybrid program. Libraries are doing that now, right? Where you have people come and sit in your auditorium, and you're also streaming it on YouTube for your patrons remotely. You're going to default there to the in-person on-site program because that's really the driver, right? That's you're doing it in person. So that's what you're going to pick there. And you'll pick only one type there. Also with programs, these are our audience ages. Just a reminder, children, we've got the teens, 12 to 18, adults are 19 plus. And the general interest is really that intergenerational thing, right? Like a family or an all ages thing. This could be if you have a fun band that comes and plays in the park for you. That's a great family or all ages program. Maybe you have a PG movie that you're showing and the whole family comes for that. You might pick a general interest or a family age range for that kind of thing. So it's your primary intended audience. And we still have self-directed activities. And you'll see when you look in the annual report, as you did last year, in the column, you'll notice that's a Connecticut question. So all of these questions about activities are specific to Connecticut. We're counting these in a way that IMLS is not, but this is a great way for you to capture some of the work you're doing in addition to programming that we weren't capturing before. So there's that same definition of a self-directed activity. Hopefully you started using this last year and started counting, but you're using the same age ranges and the same number of participants for each age range. So that's what you're counting for activities. Again, if you're using the Excel spreadsheet, it makes it really easy. We're also still counting public service hours as we always do, but a reminder that this is for when your building is open to the public, right? So I know you're working super hard behind the scenes. You're working your butts off perhaps from 9 to 10 when the doors are closed to the public, and then you open at 10. That's when your building is open to the public. You're not counting that hour when you're behind the scenes working without the public. So just a reminder about that. This became a larger factor when libraries were actually closed for several weeks for the pandemic. Remember that? And everybody was working and frantically calling and doing reference and really helping people out online and remotely. And we were not counting those as public service hours. So that's the differentiation and the clarification there. Again, with weeks open, it's the weeks that your building was open to the public. So weeks when the doors were open, weeks when people could open that door, step over your threshold, come into the building. That's what you're counting in terms of being open to the public. And you'll count the weeks you were open for half or more of your scheduled service hours. So that should be consistent with what we did previously. Here with library visits, your door count, you're counting all the people who came in for any purpose. Yay, you can count the guy who's delivering water if he comes in the door. You can count the copy or repair guy, feel free. But you're not counting people who don't come in, right? So you're not counting curbside service because they don't come in. And you're not counting drive-through window service because they don't come in. But we have questions now where you can count those transactions. So you can still include those people and those patrons and transactions in your annual report. Interlibrary loans, this is a clarification. I keep saying people keep getting a little mixed up with borrow it and ILL and what that means. So if your consortium is, if your library is part of a consortium, you can count those consortium holds as interlibrary loans because you're sending a book from one library to another to be checked out to a patron. So interlibrary loans are between libraries. That's what that word means, versus a borrow it loan, which is where an individual patron who doesn't live in your town walks into your library and uses their hometown library card, they show you that, and they are able to check out a book that's sitting on your shelves or an item that's sitting on your shelves at your library. That's a borrow it loan. So you'll notice it's to a specific patron. It's not to another library, right? Library to library is interlibrary loan. So a little reminder and clarification about how to count those things. Well, I have a huge website that we're going to take a look at in a minute, showing you where you can find all of this information. I'm going to send you this link at about 4 o'clock this afternoon, so you can find all of this after I tell it to you. That email will also have a link to where you can find the recording when I get it up on our YouTube page. And we'll also have a link to an evaluation form. So we will take a look at that website in a couple minutes. So a few reminders. There is so much information in the survey form, and I inherited a lot of this information from Tom Newman, my predecessor, but there's an entire 9 pages of documentation right at the beginning with instructions and definitions that can help to guide you. In addition, once you're in the form, there are a lot of little pop-up boxes, right? So if you hover over a question, you'll see a comment box pop up over it. That's giving you even more information about it. So if you have a question, try searching the instructions and the definitions, or try searching in the form, right? Do a Control F, search for ARPA, or search for PPP, or search for construction, and see what you come up with, because the answer is probably in there already. And Tom and I really tried to predict what kind of questions we might get and answer them ahead of time. So in many cases, you can find your answers right there in the form itself. And I encourage you to share that information with your coworkers, right? Often somebody will ask me a question and I'll say, oh, here's where you find that in the report. And the director will say, oh, I'm so sorry. I asked her to do this thing and I completely forgot to tell her that the answer is right there in the report. So please let your coworkers know that there's a lot of information already there in the survey form. Because if you're looking at a hard copy, or if you're looking at the printout PDF list of questions, you're not getting all of that information. You're not getting the full breadth of guidance that's available in the form itself. So please take a look there. And I have to keep encouraging people not to wait until the last minute to start. And please don't wait until the last minute to submit your data. I know that this is an uphill battle, but please don't wait. You may encounter COVID, you may encounter a hurricane, you may encounter a broken leg, right? Anything could happen if you wait until the last minute. I really encourage everybody start early, because a lot of this data you will have as of June 30th, right? You can grab your circ stats, you can grab your patron stats, you should be able to get all your collection numbers. Some of the financials may come a little bit later, but a lot of this stuff you can already have available to you. So please start that ahead of time. You're going to stress yourself out if you wait until the last minute, and me. Also, I want to mention, I have a bunch of webinars lined up for more information about this. So on July 28th, a Thursday, this is a brand new webinar featuring some peers from the library community, showing how they manage their library data, right? So the spreadsheets that they maintain from month to month, where they're gathering all these stats, so that at the end of the year, they can just do their annual report, piece of cake. So we'll be hearing from them for an hour in July. And then I have 3 different dates scheduled for the webinar on how to complete the report. This is a great webinar for people who are new to the report, or who contribute to it but don't really know all the ins and outs. A new director, a new administrator, new bookkeeper. I encourage you guys to come to those. Those will also be recorded. You can just pick whichever date you want to come, because it's all going to be the same content. And you just register on our continuing ed calendar. Here's the thing where I remind you to ask me questions, and where I put this link for our evaluation form into the chat. I would love to hear from you. These are easy questions about today's webinar, whether it was useful to you, and any suggestions you may have for how I can make this webinar a little more common sense or anything else, give me some guidance, because I can make changes to this webinar based on the feedback that I get from you guys. But if I don't get any feedback, it just stays the same. So I would love to hear from you. Okay, let me scoot over to the chat here. I saw a couple questions come in. Okay. Do I ever think I will change the program categories to include virtual offsite, meaning a virtual outreach program to one school or daycare, but not open to all library patrons? That already counts as a virtual program. So if you are, for instance, sitting in your library and you're kind of beaming into a school and you're doing a story time for them, that counts as a virtual program. You go ahead and count that, and you count all those people as attendees. Absolutely, you should do that. Another question. Great. Okay. Oh, those were compliments. Thank you. Great. Yep. So while we're here, I want to show you our website. So this annual report page. So when you come to all right, let me back up. Let's go home. First of all, so when you're stuck, you come to services and you're going to pick library statistics. That's one way to get here. Another way is over here on the left with all of these links. You pick library statistics. And if none of those will work for you, you're going to use the search box and search for statistics. And that's going to pull you statistics here. Let's use that one. So LibGuides, if you've used it before, you may be familiar with the layouts. At DLD, we use this kind of tabbed layout, right? So each one of these tabs is a separate page. There's a lot of info there. So we're going to look at annual report. And then as we scroll down, there are boxes, and each of these tabs within the box is another page, right? So there is a huge amount of information in here. It's like a big reference book. So I understand that people have difficulties finding things, right? Because like, where is it? What layer is it in? But if you're on the annual report page and you're looking at all of these great little tabs right here under 2022 annual report, this is where I'm going to link the form. So at some point, there's going to be an Excel form right here that you can click on and download after mid-July. But what we're talking about today is changes to the 22 report. So here is where I have repeated in writing everything that I've told you today. And I'm going to put our slides right in here so that you can download the slides if you need them. But basically, everything should be here. Here's a great link to that page about the Children's Internet Protection Act from ALA. Here's another link to help you get to the spreadsheet for tracking your program and activity counts. Here's a link to help you count the number of views or the number of times something was watched. So there's a lot of information here in this page for you. And I encourage you to scroll through it and take a look. Just refresh your memory. Let your coworkers know that this exists, all right? Right there in big letters is our new due date, November 1st. Now, say you had questions about programs, you're going to click on the Programs tab right here. Here's that spreadsheet. Please use it. Please use it. Please use it. Here's a video for how to use it. And a ton more information all about programs, how to count them, what to count, what's a program, what's an activity, all of those great things, some FAQs that I have added to here. Where do we find all this? Oh, here's that reminder. Who came up with the age groups? Yep. Let your coworkers know about this too. So that's where that is. I'm going to scroll back up here. It just never ends, right? And then if you're curious about state aid or previous year's reports, that's here too. But changes to 2022 report, that's where all the good stuff is that we talked about today. That's where I'm going to put the slides. You'll be able to find the recording right here on our YouTube channel. Okay, I'm going to scroll back through the chat, but I think I got all the questions that came in. If you have any more questions, you can find me. If I take a look over here, here's you can email me all the time. Okay, I think we got everybody. Anybody want to turn on their mic and ask a question? Are we good? Okay. I'm hearing crickets. All right. So I'm just going to say thank you to everybody who came. Really appreciate your time. Follow up with me if you have questions. tell your coworkers what you learned, and I will hear from you with your report by November 1st, okay? Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.